all of you, PA is one of my favorite states. And as I tell everybody that I meet with all over the world, nurses run the world. And, if people don't know that, it's something they need to be aware of. So I appreciate all of you and feel privileged to be with you today. I developed for us a presentation that I started to work on with the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response to help address healthcare workers' needs in the wake of COVID. And we've developed a couple of tools that we took from the National Center for PTSD and from the literature around cognitive behavioral strengthening, and developed a way for anyone who doesn't really want to go ahead and have a full-scale therapy segment of cognitive behavioral therapy to learn some tools to help deal with the stresses that we've been going through. And that's what we call our cognitive strengthening presentation. I just want to tell you today, we have a generous grant from the Brave of Heart Fund, which is funded by the New York Trust Sigma and is given to us by E4E Relief. So they're paying for any expenses for today, and we appreciate them. They've asked us to do work specifically for healthcare workers, volunteers, and support staff who've been dealing with COVID-19. As we know, we're continuing to do that. So we appreciate them. I work for Vibrant Emotional Health, which used to be called the Mental Health Association New York City. We changed the name because we started to do a lot of national work, and we actually just launched the 988 Suicide and Lifeline crisis work. So we were previously the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Congress decided to change the number to an easy to remember 3-digit number that anybody can access from anywhere. And all the states are now being funded to actually pay crisis centers to answer telephones for people who are in suicidal crisis or in other types of emotional crisis. So I'm thrilled to be back at Vibrant. I helped launch the Suicide Lifeline back in 2004. Just really privileged to be here with you today. And this particular presentation, as I said, was developed specifically for healthcare professionals, nurses in particular. We know you're the largest number of healthcare workers out there in the field today. And those of you who are called upon to respond to all kinds of emergencies and disasters, as well as those who support you. So we're looking at identifying compassion fatigue, secondary traumatic stress, and I am going to talk a little bit about burnout, which has been a big issue in COVID, but it is a separate issue, and I want to make sure we understand the differentiation. And we're looking for ways to help reduce stress and mitigate the development of distress as you go through the work that you're doing, and cognitively think about ways to help yourself to be stronger. I'm going to ask Dana to launch a poll for us, and I want to ask you and get a sense of how you're feeling, and if you believe you're experiencing any compassion fatigue or secondary traumatic stress or burnout or the extreme, a diagnosable type illness like post-traumatic stress disorder, which some people can experience if they've had a severe traumatic event. So if you can launch the poll, Dana, and we can ask people, I believe you can answer more than one, and we'll see what the results look like.
It has been launched and we have some answers already.
Cool.
We have about 73% for compassion fatigue, 9% for secondary traumatic stress, 18% for burnout, and 9% for post-traumatic stress disorder.
9% for PTSD. Okay, so 73% compassion fatigue. Mm-hmm. What was the percentage? I think I just missed secondary traumatic stress.
9%.
9%, okay. So compassion fatigue, 73%. I think I'm speaking to a well-informed group because this actually aligns a little bit more with the research than what I hear from most people. Everybody jumps to PTSD. You know, the media has done that and everybody's talking about PTSD. And certainly we've seen burnout because of some of the organizational issues that have come up, but I'm going to do the differentiation there. So I'm going to be speaking a lot today to compassion fatigue. So sounds to me like that's going to apply to the majority of you here. And 9% secondary traumatic stress that's related to some of our own experiences. That's a bit of a low number. So that means that people are dealing with this in some way. PTSD at 9% is a higher number than the national average. I suspect it's because of incidents that we've experienced over the past 5 years, including COVID and increase in mass violence incidents, accidents, people being in violent community situations. The average for most people is around 5%, regardless of any events that have happened over our entire recorded history of PTSD. So we're seeing it a little bit higher in the group that we have here today. And again, that could be because of your exposure. And I'll absolutely talk about that a little bit more. So thanks for your willingness to share and be vulnerable and let us know where you're from, so what you're dealing with. As healthcare providers in general, and especially ones who are doing emergency work, responding to COVID, in the front lines, it's likely that you've been exposed to a lot of traumatic situations. And exposure is the thing that can really cause distress. Right? We can see something, we can hear about it, being in there with it on the front lines. These are the types of things that can actually impact us emotionally and cause traumatic stress. We can know about these things from the news. There is some literature that younger people can actually have the same symptoms as if they were there by watching something on the news, especially if developmentally they don't understand what's happening. But it's more likely that we see this in population of those who've been directly exposed to either working with victims, and you've seen all kinds of things, right? COVID was not new. You've seen AIDS, you've seen Ebola, you've seen people who come in with gunshots and knives and all kinds of violent crime, fires, crashes, all kinds of life-threatening injuries. And of course, now we're a little bit more aware of biohazards, which can really cause some horrific threats, not only to those that you're taking care of, but worrying about yourself as well, as we saw with COVID. So you're trying to protect everybody, and you have to cope with sometimes larger scale incidents, the number of floods and hurricanes, tornadoes in the areas where there are multiple victims requiring life-saving efforts all at the same time can really cause intense pressure to perform quickly and continuously for long periods of time. We saw that in the Las Vegas shooting. 58 people had several bullet wounds, and 600 had some type of exposure and a bullet wound. So the hospitals were fabulous, but they were very overwhelmed. It was a lot of people coming in. So what I really want to focus on here is the fact that most healthcare providers don't see themselves as individuals who would develop compassion fatigue or secondary stress. And that's probably because most of you tend to be, right, your caregivers, highly self-reliant. I say that especially caregivers and nurses are the grittiest people I know. Can get through just about anything. You're not seeing yourself as people who need assistance from others. And, the stigma around behavioral health concerns and mental health concerns is just as strong in the health-related disciplines as it is in the general public. Again, most people don't see themselves in need of mental health services, even in the intensely stressful environment that you're working in. And then you've got the issues that nurses deal with all the time, right? Staffing patterns, people calling in sick. You're having to work several shifts, put in long hours, skipping breaks, working through lunch, what I call it working till it hurts syndrome. Just feeling like it's all right for you to sacrifice your own comfort and your self-care to ensure the care of others. So, if you're a healthcare professional who does a really good job of taking care of yourself, I congratulate you. But I know that you're not the norm. So we see, especially nurses are very, very giving, very caretaking, and that can make you a little bit more susceptible to things like compassion fatigue and secondary stress, and especially burnout. So as a group, additionally, you're skilled in providing very specific services, not only as an individual, but in teams. And this can make your performance, because it's so visible, right, to all your coworkers, you tend to work a bit harder at controlling and concealing your distress symptoms. You don't want to be seen as weak or providing any basis to be judged by your peers or by your supervisor. So that brings healthcare professionals into the risk of, suffering a little bit more than most people. Again, you might be seeing a high number of trauma cases. Or you lack confidence or specific training. These are two things we see on a professional basis in the literature. We also see that we are a society of a high-fat diet, a high-salt diet. This can add to distress, and race and genetics also, play a role. You can have some type of hereditary issue. And we know too that single professional caregivers, the literature is actually about mothers, right? Mothers who are taking care of children tend to suffer more than any other population because you are giving up your own needs to take care of your children. And it's similar to what healthcare workers do, giving up their own needs to take care of their patients. So we know those who are caregivers tend to be more at risk. And especially in the personal realm, if you have a history of trauma, right? Everybody's had something happen that maybe you haven't resolved. Or if you are isolated or without good social support, this is a red flag. A big red flag. People who are isolated, I'm more concerned about than anybody else. And then those who have a lack of good coping skills, or if you actively use negative coping skills like, pills or alcohol or things that can really bring you down. So let's look at what is secondary traumatic stress. It's actually experiencing the same symptoms as those you're treating. In many ways, you're having this shared experience. Secondary traumatic stress can happen with just one case, right? A mother comes in, she's got a 6-month-old who something happened, and you have the same situation at home. You've got the same age, you have had the same experience. You can experience and feel the same distress as the person that you're helping. And we see these, a fear of your own safety and life responses, a panic attack, rapid heartbeat. Headaches are very, very common. Headaches and stomach aches without any physiological reason, fatigue and exhaustion. I can share the whiteboard here. I suspect that you guys know this already, but I'm going to ask you to take a guess and tell me in the physical realm, which is the most common incident that we see, the most common problem that we see. I had the whiteboard here and now I lost it. Come on. We have rapid heartbeat, panic, headaches, stomach aches, fatigue, sleep issues, and lower immune function problems, functional problems. What do you think is the most common? You can use the chat box, or you can, I'm trying to pull up the whiteboard here if I can do that. I will be able to give you an opportunity.
Avery, do you see it anywhere near your chat box?
No, you know why? I think because I'm sharing my screen, it's not letting me do that. So maybe we can do it in the chat. Sleep issues. Number 1, Holly got it. Ding, 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 ding. Every single group I've ever worked with, from 9/11 responders and victims' families to child soldiers in Uganda to hurricane victims in Louisiana, every single group, sleep issues, either not being able to go to sleep or not being able to stay asleep. And people don't often associate it to traumatic stress. And so it's really good to know, because good sleep will change your life. So addressing that can really help you to get rid of other issues. And Dr. Deb, thank you for fatigue and exhaustion, especially around compassion fatigue. You see a lot of that. People will complain about being tired no matter how much sleep they get. And emotionally, you see a lot of things. Anxiety is very, very common in all different forms: sadness, crying, anger. If you're used to kind of reaching out in anger and lashing out. We see lots of people with mood slings, and of course, as I said before, alcohol and substance misuse. Work-related issues, you'll see avoidance, right? Tardiness, absenteeism, and then we see people have lower morale, lack of motivation. And spiritually, people will often question. You'll see this after a particular incident. People might leave the profession, they might leave their family, they decide that I want something that has more meaning for me, and they seek that out. So we see a lot of indicators of different types of stress that are affecting people. So you see on the left in the purple box is compassion fatigue, exhaustion, overworking, depressive-like symptoms. And one of the more unusual things, obsession with helping. In the beginning, people are so obsessed with helping, they want to work all the time. They always pick up shifts. and feel like they have to do more, they have to do better. Secondary traumatic stress, again, it's a parallel of your client's symptoms. So you're feeling what they're feeling, but either because of your own experience or just because you're over empathic with them and haven't set up the kind of boundaries that you need to protect yourself. And secondary traumatic stress can actually look like PTSD. You can have nightmares, avoidance, disassociation, some pretty serious symptoms if it's not addressed. So it's very important to make sure that you recognize if you're having secondary traumatic stress. Vicarious trauma is similar to compassion fatigue. It tends to happen over time, but it also does have the effect of people questioning how they think. Okay, the world isn't a safe place anymore. Why did God do this? They tend to have a change in their worldview. And again, they'll often either leave the profession, leave the family, or do something drastic because they've had such a shift in how they perceive the world before. So it's a little bit nuanced, vicarious trauma, and it does tend to happen over time. Whereas with secondary traumatic stress, that can happen with one incident of being exposed to somebody whose symptoms you absorb. Burnout is the most different. Unfortunately, it's the most commonly used term, but it's generally what we say is burnout is not about the work, but about the workplace. And I hear people say this all the time. It's not my patients that are a problem. It's not the work. I'm okay with that, but I can't stand my supervisor, or the policies of this agency just don't work with how I function. I don't get along with my peers. It's really about the workplace and the structure. And again, people tend to leave when they're feeling burned out. And that's why we heard the term so much in COVID, because people were overworked, didn't have enough staff, didn't get enough support from the executive staff. All these types of organizational issues that came to bear on the fact that you're also doing some very intense work taking care of other people who are very sick. I think add to that was that you did have some patients who were unkind and uncaring and were not protecting you, in addition to not protecting themselves or even making an attempt to reduce the COVID exposure. So it is still a fairly tough experience. There are also professional and interpersonal effects. You become less productive, less communicative, really obsessed and unable to start working, which we see a lot in nurses. And again, isolation and withdrawal is a red flag. You want to look for people that you're concerned about. And again, anger. You also see decreased interest in intimacy and sex. You see a lot of people who wind up being alone or who just won't be with others and really isolate themselves. And, we're meant to be with others to care about somebody. It doesn't necessarily have to be sex, but to have relationship, to be with others, to be with people who think about like you do in many ways and have similarities, or people who understand and accept how you feel. And so we're concerned about those who are isolated. And healthcare workers, we hear over and over and over again, these 4 acting out negative coping ways of being: self-medicating, overeating or drinking, and often extramarital affairs, and even suicide gestures. Suicide has increased in the healthcare profession dramatically, and we're very, very concerned of people who are using negative types of coping. Makes you feel good in the immediate, but then has these really negative effects on your life and your health. So the good news is that we do get satisfaction from the work that we do, right? It has meaning. You're not pushing numbers, you're not counting money, you're taking care of people. You're actually doing life-changing type work, life-saving type work. And that makes you feel good. So we've got to admit that we like that, right? We can actually change things. We're under more stress than other types of professionals, like trying to, what does the Joint Commission require? That you get things right 99.9% of the time. That's quite a stressor for any human being. You're not allowed to make mistakes, right? So we have to monitor for that feeling of exhaustion and feeling like, you can't do anything right, and you constantly have to do things over and over again, or continue to work so hard because of this need to be perfect. The pressure that society puts on nurses and physicians and other healthcare professionals is unrealistic. We know that that work satisfaction can mitigate compassion fatigue. So if you know that you like the work that you're doing, you like the population you're working with, right? And you're comfortable with the work that you're doing, you're probably less likely to get compassion fatigue. But to be able to recognize, that if you're self-confident and competent, this is a real gift. If you have connection to others, people in your family, your chosen family, friends, have spiritual connection, we know that these things can protect you from getting compassion fatigue. So we want to watch again, what types of symptoms are you having, and how can we help to recognize that we have some good things happening as well. So you want to look at, what are you bringing? What are your personal experiences? What's your professional level of skill and competency? How are you physically and mentally? And what are your vulnerabilities? With this kind of self-awareness, you really can help to mitigate any problems of compassion fatigue or secondary traumatic stress, or at least know how to deal with them. We talk about self-care a lot. So what is that? What's this concept mean? Right? It's everything. It's your whole self, your physical body, your emotional and mental health, your relational health. Do you have relationships? And your spiritual health, as we mentioned. Do you have a sense of meaning? When you're creating a self-care plan, you want to look at each of these aspects and write at least 1 or 2 actions that might address each of these things. Like, are you walking every day? Do you do anything that brings you joy? At least one thing a day that brings you joy. And do you connect with others who care about you, whether it's texting or writing? And so what fulfills you? As healthcare professionals who are engaged in a lot of high-level emergency work, have you and your family prepared to manage what happens when you're pulled into these long, intense days of work? Do you have a go pack? Do you have things that will help you to feel better? I have a go pack that has pictures of my family. That really comforts me. I use an old-fashioned iPod that has a calming playlist and a playlist for upbeat music. What are the things that you need at work that can help you to feel better and take care of yourself? This is a big part of self-care, right? We want to look at all of our aspects of health. How are you doing physically? Do you stop and eat, or are you eating at your desk all the time? What's your attitude, and do you have a clarity of thought? And what are your coping skills? Can you identify those that work for you? What we find is when people are really stressed, they stop using those coping skills that generally help them. And do you have a sense of meaning and purpose in your work? So when you're creating a self-care plan, you want to look at all of these aspects. What are you doing that fulfills your needs? And again, you can look at each one of these and pick something out. So let's look at it. If you've got pen and paper in front of you, this is a very simple self-care exercise that I want to take you through to show you how simple some of this can be, right? You want to prepare yourself for coping with stress. And the first way to do that is to create a profile. And this means knowing ahead of time what stresses you out and what decreases your stress. So don't wait to do this until you're stressed, right? It's too late. Let's take a few minutes. What are the things that stress you out at work? Write 1 or 2 of them down in one corner on a piece of paper. And that can be anything. Is it the unit clerk who doesn't do what you ask, or who's too perky, or just, doesn't replenish supplies? Is it the patients who are constantly ringing the bell? What is it that stresses you out? Is it your staff who are always asking for something last minute? And it could be different for every single person. What is it that stresses you out about work? Don't think about what happens on the unit to other people. For me, I was traveling like every week for years, and the airport would stress me out. If I would see the TA agents, the TSA agents not treating people properly, I wanted to yell at them. I kept thinking I'm going to get arrested and thrown into a room one day because I want to tell them, no, you're not supposed to separate families. Wait a minute, you're not paying attention. I would get really agitated. And what are your warning signs, right? So this is a really good thing to know. It's what we call the prodromals. I'm sure you've heard the term before. What happens to you right before you lose it? right? When you've been dealing with this issue for a while, you let it go, or you just try and deal with it, and suddenly you recognize that you're about to lose it. Do you start yelling at your kids? Do you cry? Do you call in sick? Do you excuse yourself and feel like you don't want to go back to work? Do you get sick? You get a headache, a stomach ache? People don't usually assign these things to stress. They're very common things that happen when we're stressed. So what are your warning signs? You know, for me, go back to the airport example. I would start complaining in my head about what the TSA agents are doing, and then like watching everything that they were doing. You know, this was not good. I would get really agitated. What are your warning signs? You want to try and do something before you get to the point of blowing up. So you want to know, what are your prodromals? Again, they're different for everybody else. What really gets you at work the most? And then what strategies do you use? What are your negative strategies? Do you yell at your staff? Do you avoid talking about the problem and just not deal with it? You know, you have to really be honest with yourself. What are your usual strategies? And are they negative strategies or are they positive ones? What are good strategies that you can implement? Right? Do you take a couple of aspirin? Do you take a walk? Do you hydrate? Do you go grab something to eat because you finally recognize your blood sugar's dropped? You haven't eaten anything. I live with a nurse. It's always a blood sugar issue. It's 8-9 hours without eating. I always know that because this is like one of the most gentle people in the world. So when that's not the case, I know it's a blood sugar issue. What is it for you? Are you yelling at the kids to leave you alone because you're tired? You know, try and figure out what you're doing and what could you do instead? What works for you? Do you need to take a walk as soon as you come home so that you breathe, get some air? Body movement is a tremendous gift. Even 10 minutes of body movement, it moves stress hormones out of your body. Do you need to take some time and gather yourself? Do you need to be quiet? Try to write a couple of things down that are positive strategies for you and think about whether you need to do them every day. I was previously, the past 6 months, the big boss left. We just launched 988, a $500 million program with 200 crisis centers, and I had to step in. And I worked 17 days straight. I was working, 16 hours a day, and I was getting really upset because simple things were bothering me. Right? I hadn't spoken to my mother. I didn't call the doctor, stupid things that were just building up and bothering. So I decided I would do one thing every day, just one thing, whether it's call my mother, make my appointment with the doctor, something. And it just made me feel better that I got one personal thing done every day. So these do not have to be big ways to take care of yourself or change your whole life. They can be simple things that make you feel better. You need to know what they are, what makes you feel better. I put here the core 4. This is from our colleagues at the National Center for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. It's not therapy, right? We can do a whole alphabet soup, EMDR, CBT, EFT. The research is through the roof that nothing helps as much as social supports, regulated sleep, body movement, and simple body movement. We're not talking about heavy duty exercise, walking, breathing, and stretching. These are what we call no harm types of things that will move the stress hormones through your body. And then for those of you who may be already participating, some kind of active mental relaxation, and I'll go into what that is. Mostly we talk about mindfulness. And there are all kinds of apps that you can use to help you with this. But even taking a 10-minute walk on your break will make things differently, make you feel differently. So what's one thing you can do to reduce your stress? Do you need help to carry it out? So do you need to remind yourself? Do you need an alarm? Do you need somebody else to do it with? When can you do it? If you have a calendar, you need to write it down. We know that we don't do things unless, or we're much more likely to do them, I should say, when we write them down. And what resources do you need to do them, if any? The best thing is just something really simple. And how can you use your own self-care plan when you're really, really stressed out and working in emergencies? So let's do another short exercise. Think of 3 leisure activities that you enjoy. And for those of you who don't know what leisure activities are, they are things not related to work. Think of 3 leisure activities that you enjoy. And they can be very simple: reading a book, taking a bath, taking a walk, whatever. What are the things you enjoy doing the most? How many times in the past week have you done them? Have you done only one of them in the past week? If you did it only once, or did you do it twice? Have you done all 3 of them every day, or maybe just once in the week? And how many times have you done them in the past month? Now, for those of you who can't say that you've done anything in the past month, I think it's a message that you need to work on this and think about how you can start to integrate some of your leisure activities for your self-care into the calendar. Our colleagues who teach change of behavior tell us that if we write things down, if we write the date and the time on our calendar or somewhere on a reminder, we're much more likely to do them. Now, that doesn't mean you're married to this, right? If it can't happen, that's fine. Move it, change it, but at least it's there and you give yourself a chance of participating. The other thing that we can do to decrease compassion fatigue and burnout is to build resilience. There are 10 different characteristics of resilience that the research tell us really help us to function better. Attitude, self-awareness, internal control, right? Being aware of what we can do to control our emotion or emotion regulation. Optimism, social support. I told you this is number 1. It's right in the middle here. It is the number 1 thing you can do. Being with people who understand and accept how you feel. Humor. Exercise, again, light exercise. When you're under stress and you do too much heavy exercise, you can actually damage your muscles. Spirituality or sense of meaning. Perseverance, right? The ability to keep trying something, and patience. So these are 10 characteristics. Now, some of us are born with these characteristics. Others of us have to develop them. So I challenge you to look at these and decide, do you have one of these that you want to get better at? Or is there something you're not good at that you want to build upon? Like I'm a trainer, right? So people always tell you when you're doing the master training that you should bring humor in. I'm just not good at humor. I am content driven. I'm dry. It's just the way I've always been. So I was trying to bring humor into a few sessions and people would not laugh at things that I thought were supposed to be funny. And then they'd laugh at things that I didn't know were funny. So I'd go home and explain this to my family and try to get it. I didn't get it. Then I'd build in a few more things and I'd try them out of my family. My granddaughters would go, no, you can't do that one. So I gave up on trying to build humor. So I'm working on other things. So again, you don't have to be perfect at everything, but if you can build 1 or 2 of more or build upon the skills that you already have, you will fare better than people who don't try to look at building resilience, whether it's building self-awareness or self-regulation or just trying to have a different attitude. And I'm going to show you how to do that right now, because we're going to move to, in addition to having peers help out, peer support is just climbing in the literature as help. If you don't have a buddy on your shift, you might want to do that. Can you get together with other people and practice self-care? Is there somebody that you can work with to seek support? It doesn't have to be a supervisor. It can just be somebody that you talk to as an equal, right? When we do peer support, we're not talking about a hierarchy. Supervisors and managers can be in there, but everybody should be speaking as equals. We used to do this when I worked in a hospital in my early career 30 years ago. We always had peer support sessions and just always felt better talking to each other about what was going on. They bring us into grand rounds. We were so privileged. We felt that the doctors were really paying attention to us when they'd bring us into grand rounds, and we found out that they wanted to do the same thing that we were doing around peer support. So it was something that they opened themselves up to as well. So think about if you don't have a group of peers to connect with, or if there is something you can do 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes during the day at lunchtime, even if you're taking a walk together and just talking about how the day was. Peer support is really, oops, I went the wrong way, growing as a way to help each other. I'm going to go to the ProQual. I sent out through Dana a professional quality of life tool. This is one of the only research-based tools that helps you determine if you have compassion fatigue, compassion satisfaction, which helps mitigate compassion fatigue, or burnout. Because the treatment is different for compassion fatigue versus burnout. So if you haven't done the ProQual, I highly recommend that you do that. And at the end of the recording, when we're done here with the webinar, I can talk you through the scoring if you haven't scored it already, because it's a research based tool. You have to reverse the scoring on 5 of the items. The most important thing about completing the ProQual is to be honest. Take your time and be honest. So I really, really encourage you, if you didn't fill it out already, to do so and to look at the scoring. It's, again, a little bit complicated because it's research-based, but it's a very good tool. I suggest that people use about once a quarter. There's also some really good material on the Vicarious Trauma Toolkit the Office for Victims of Crime has put out, and that's one of the resources I have at the end here. Also look at training to develop your skills, because we know that people who are more confident and who feel more competent have less compassion fatigue and burnout. So let's look at how to strengthen the way we address the distress that we're in contact with. There are 5 different tools that we use: cognitive restructuring and reframing. You may have heard of that one. Attention diversion, mindfulness, adaptive engaging, and adaptive effective expression. And again, these are not as complicated as they sound. And they are the types of interventions that anyone can do. You don't have to go for mental health treatment to learn how to do these things. The first one, cognitive restructuring, is one of the most effective. This basically means, and please don't take this as I'm saying that you're causing your own stress. That's not the message here. The message here is that how we perceive and what we do about the stress that we're faced with can really change our behavior and our responses. It basically means that what you think is going to control how you feel. So when we talk about doing a cognitive restructuring exercise, what you want to do is identify your thought. Right? So say you're having a staff member come in who you have to do a corrective action or a performance improvement, and your first thought is, oh man, I do not want to do this. Right? That's going to affect how you deal with that particular person. The goal is to enable you to identify and challenge your own thoughts. So when we're having a panic attack, we're basically thinking, consciously or unconsciously, I'm going to die. Right? Something is seriously wrong here. So to be able to change that thought at the moment or as soon after the moment that you have it is a very powerful technique. So you want to identify and write down your disturbing thought. What is it that you say? I don't want to do this. I feel terrible. This is something that's really painful. This is hurtful. This is upsetting. It's an important activity and it's often hard to do. But we want to identify the disturbing thought. And then when you've done that, you want to look at that thought and say, okay, now what do I want to think instead? And so we want to stop the thought, right? And say, what is this? Stop, think, take a breath. And then we want to reframe it. What do I want to tell myself? I know how to do this. I'm going to be kind. I'm going to do the best I can, right? We have FBI agents who work on internet porn, trolling the internet so they can identify and capture people. Now, not just saying the words, you want to throw up. It's very disturbing. And many of these staff who were FBI agents for years were dropping out and leaving the profession after doing this work. And so we worked with them on cognitive restructuring. What was the thought? This could, of course, what would it be, right? If you're seeing that, what would the disturbing thought be? This could be my child. This could be my grandchild. This could be my family member. That's what most of them were thinking. And so you want to identify that thought because that's the one you want to speak to and change. You want to insert a new thought. So what's the new thought that you want to insert? This isn't my child. I'm keeping my family safe. My family is okay. And I imagine that it would be something that would be similar, when you're in the emergency room, when you're seeing people very sick on a unit, when you're dealing with difficult staff. Right? Try to identify the disturbing thought because that's the one that you need to change, and that will change how you feel. So it is about our perception. We're always going to have stressors, and we're not responsible for our stressors, but we can control how we respond to them. So you want to identify your disturbing thought, get yourself to acknowledge it and stop and say, okay, stop, think. Take a breath. What do I want to tell myself instead? I am okay. I am safe. My family is safe. I know how to do this. I can do this well. I can get this done. So it sounds like a simple exercise, but it's not always easy to identify the most disturbing thought. I suggest that you then write down the new thought, put it on a card, put it next to your computer, next to your, desk, because you have to practice this. You have to practice changing your thoughts because what's going to happen is your automatic thoughts are going to come back. Things that you may have thought for years. I hate supervising staff. I hate having to correct staff. I don't like dealing with gunshot victims or gang violence. It upsets me. If we still have those thoughts, we're always going to feel bad about it. So you want to identify what is it that you want to tell yourself. You don't want to be a black and white thinker, right? Think carefully about the ways that you might help yourself to correct a distortion or just to help yourself feel better. I can do this. I know how to do this. I know this is hard, but I've done it before. I'm good at this. I'm going to do my best, right? Give yourself those thoughts that can really change how you feel. That's a very simple exercise around cognitive restructuring. Thought stopping, thought insertion. I highly recommend, I have index cards and all kinds of notes and things that always help me to remind me. I suggest that you do the same. If there's a message that you're trying to give yourself, write it down and put it at your desk. Attention diversion is also acceptable, and that means doing something completely different when you're very upset, walking away from it, giving yourself a chance to do something completely different. Watch a stupid commercial, dance, go do something completely different, do some paperwork that you were trying to get, not wanting to do because you were dealing with something. It decreases the intensity of feelings when you completely change what you're doing. If you're really upset about something, you can't stop being upset about it. Completely change. It's avoidance, basically. And we're very good at that in our society, right? We're a society of avoidance and denial. What I'm saying to you here is that we're doing this purposefully as a way to regulate our emotions. If you can't calm yourself down and you're really distressed, walk away and do something completely different. The trick with this is just make it temporary. When you calm down and when you're feeling like you can deal with it, go back to it. You want to get to some resolution about why you were so upset and how to do the emotion regulation without having to go to avoidance and denial all the time. Or at least make sure you don't continue to avoid and deny what set you off. You're gonna have to get to some resolution. So the trick about attention diversion is to please know that it should only be temporary, but it is absolutely fine to use it as a way to regulate your emotions. And you can say this to people, I need 10 minutes. I was in a heated discussion with my CEO a couple of weeks ago, and I stopped in the middle of it and I said to her, I really need to take a walk. And I thought she was going to blast me and say, really, like now? And instead she said, oh, that's a really good idea. So clearly we both needed to do that, but I needed to do that for emotion regulation. I'm Italian, I'm very expressive. You see my hands going, my emotions are often very intense. So I use this tool a lot. And again, it's okay to do. We've worked on this again with our colleagues at the National Center for PTSD who say this is fine and acceptable. It's a good coping skill as long as it's temporary and that you do go back and address and get to some resolution about the issue. Mindfulness, I'm sure many of you know about. The better you get at being able to stay focused, your cognition strengthens. It really does help you to be able to focus better and control your emotions. The most simple exercise is to sit quiet. Make sure your feet are flat on the ground, your hands resting on your lap or by your side. Some people close their eyes, others just lower their lids to a certain level and start focusing on your breathing. Breathing in slowly. We know that the exhale is very important, so we want to emphasize the exhale. Just allowing your thoughts to come and go, whatever they are, just keep focusing, just practicing a quiet mind. Do 3 minutes, then do 5 minutes later on in the couple of days later. It can be a couple of weeks later. When I was running the 9/11 response in New York after the towers came down, it was how I would start my day. Literally only 3 minutes, but I would sit at my desk and just be quiet. It reduces stress dramatically. You can lower your blood pressure. You can lower your heart rate. You know this. You're nurses. You get this. So practicing mindfulness wherever you can, whenever you can, but get good at it so you can do it when you need to. Adaptive engaging means being with others, seeking out others who understand and accept how you feel. Take a risk to talk to others when you're distressed, when you need some help with coping, maybe in building your resilience. You want to make sure that you're avoiding people who say, "Oh, don't worry about it. You shouldn't be doing that. Don't do this, don't do that." You want to be with people who understand and accept how you feel, that you can engage with. Now, that might be going to the movies. It doesn't have to mean talking about your distress. It can just be with someone who is accepting of you, how you are in the moment, any day, anytime. Seek those people out. Strangely enough, we tend to be with people who can often give us a hard time. We tend to not be seeking out those people who are the most healthy for us to be with. I don't know whether we're looking for a challenge or we want risk or, we're looking to be busy, but try and identify those people who understand and accept how you feel, who you can engage with good coping, whether it's walking, going to the movies, just having a chat, and try and avoid the negative coping behaviors. For some people, it may be, look, I can't do this on Friday because by Friday comes, I'm done. But then who can you go and seek out on Saturday or maybe Thursday before you get to Friday and just have a cup of coffee with, a cup of tea, a chat with? Social support is more helpful than anything else we can do. Social support, social support, social support. You'll hear me say that over and over again. Seek out people. We tend to isolate ourselves when we're upset, even if it's a 10-minute phone conversation. Adaptive, effective expression. It's a way of helping yourself to identify your distressing emotions. Do you even know when you're distressed and what the emotion is that you're having? If you're angry a lot, you need to know that that's usually a cover for a different emotion. Are you grieving? We've had so many losses the last couple of years. Change in the way we do everything on a day-to-day basis, not being with people, having people who were sick in our family or friends, people who died. What is the distressing emotion? Take some time to think about it. What am I really feeling? And do you want to talk to somebody about it? Do you need to have a ritual? Rituals are really important. We've lost a lot of them over the years in our society in general, but certainly because of COVID. Writing a note and throwing it away, lighting a candle and remembering somebody, putting a picture of someone on your desk, any ritual that you can engage in can reduce your stress. Think about doing something, whether it's listing your gratitudes once a week, whether it's saying thank you to people when you normally wouldn't. How can you express what it is that you need to? We're not good at doing this. I'm serious when I say we are a society of avoidance and denial. And this is where your prodromal activities can help. You don't want to get yourself to the point where you're feeling so badly that you make a poor decision, you get in a car accident, you get sick physically. What starts to happen when you're really getting to the point of being so stressed that something bad is going to happen? This is where identifying your prodromos. Do you walk around the house, yelling at yourself? Does the things get really sloppy and you don't clean up for a week? What is it that happens? You want to identify this before it gets to a bad point and figure out, what do I need to do? It may be getting up, walking out of the house and go being with your best friend who listens to you, or being on the phone with them for an hour, or walking by yourself for an hour someplace. I live 1.5 miles from the beach, the ocean beach. It's gorgeous. Do I go there? I actually have to plan it. I have to put it in my calendar and say, oh, because I can do it in like 40 minutes. I can go there and back. I could do it every day for lunch. Do I? No. I stay at my desk and I work. I have to plan it. So what I'm saying to you is plan to do things that can de-stress you. So there are 4 different tools that when you practice them, I know they sound really simple, but if you practice them, you will be stronger for them. You will be stronger emotionally. Not only that, your brain will learn to do them without you having to think about it. So you want to practice them so they become the habit. Who do I need to talk to? Maybe I need to write something down. Maybe I need to take a walk. What is it that you can start to incorporate simply into your life to strengthen your ability to keep doing the phenomenally good work that you do, the important work and the necessary work? We can't lose you. There are not like millions of people lined up to take over your job, right? We know this. Nurse managers, nurse administrators, supervisors, certainly not the line staff either. Tough, tough positions to be in. So there's lots and lots of resources on self-care. There's also a couple of really good apps that are free. Calm is a really nice app. Insight Timer. They always charge, but there are tons and tons of free materials, so you don't have to go to the paying subscription. Your unconscious mind will listen to the words without your having to think about them. So pick the voices, right? Where voices are really important to us. When you're listening to somebody who's saying affirmations or a guided imagery or a meditation, check out their voices first. You might have somebody's voice might be like, oh no, can't listen to that one. That's fine. Let it go. Find another one. Leave it on when you're doing the dishes. Leave it on when you're going to sleep at night. You don't have to focus on them. You can just let them play, and your unconscious mind will listen to the words and be able to take them in, especially if you're in a relaxed state where your heart rate is calmer, your blood pressure is calmer. So anyway, check out some of the apps. There's also some really good stuff available on the Asper Tracy website, which is specifically for healthcare workers. Asper Tracy is a federal government organization. The Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response is the Asper part. Tracy is their technical assistance. They put out a newsletter that's extraordinary. It's for healthcare workers specifically, so it speaks to your issues. The Disaster Distress Helpline is available 24/7, 365 for anybody who's experienced a disaster. It doesn't matter if it was a year ago or yesterday. There are trained crisis counselors on the line 24/7, 365. They do a very, very good job of talking through whatever the crisis may be, emotional crisis, issues from having experienced a flood, a disaster, a mass violence incident. And the new 988 suicide crisis line is not just for suicide calls. Anybody in emotional crisis can call. anybody. This is the most highly trained group of folks I've ever seen in my career. I have a PhD from a very highly accredited school, my master's also from a very highly accredited school, never took a suicide assessment course or had any of my professors talk about suicide. It was the time where you said you don't talk about suicide because that means it's going to happen. Or you're going to force it to happen. That's a myth. We know that's a myth. But I tell you about the suicide line because I know that many people don't have training in suicide prevention. You can pick up a phone, call the suicide line with the patient in front of you or the person or your loved one in front of you and have them talk with a trained suicide prevention counselor. Right there and then, they will probably get a better assessment they can get in most hospitals. And I say that with love. I used to run a psych hospital in New Jersey. Again, we just weren't very well trained in this. This is the most highly trained group of professionals in the crisis and suicide line. They will talk somebody down. There's a lot of chatter about calling 911 and getting the police to arrest people who have a mental illness or suicide. We don't do that unless it's somebody who's already taken some action to end their life or is saying that they're going to do so imminently, and it's less than 1% of the calls. They can generally talk people down. Suicide, even though somebody may be thinking about it for years, is an impulsive act. And we can generally talk somebody down from a suicide crisis in an average of about 20 minutes. So we encourage professionals who are not trained in suicide prevention to use the line. If you've got a patient, a family member, a friend, call 988, hand them the phone, stay on the line with them if you need to, but get them to a trained suicide prevention counselor. And additionally, there's tons and tons of resources on the National Center for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. Most people don't get PTSD after a trauma. If that were the case, we would not survive as a species because we experience so much trauma all the time. Most of us can manage, build your resilience, right? Decrease your negative coping, increase your cognitive way of controlling your responses, and practice body movement, breathing, stretching, walking, hydration, and being with others who care about and understand how you feel. I would do the pro qual every couple of months too, because it really can tell you, are you headed towards burnout? Are you avoiding the fact that maybe you can't stand your supervisor, or you really don't like the agency you're working with, or you don't get along with your peers? Sometimes changing a department can help rather than you're leaving the organization altogether or the profession altogether. But if you're suffering with compassion fatigue, what do you need to do? Are you boundaries being blurred a little bit more? Are you working with kids? I've been doing mass violence incidents now for several years. I'm on the Uvalde Review Committee for the Attorney General, and people are like, how can you do that? That's so distressing. I really see it as a sacred place to be and a privilege to be able to support and help people in these situations. So I get a lot of compassion satisfaction out of it. But if you're finding you're not getting compassion satisfaction out of the work and feeling a lot more compassion fatigue, it's something you want to take a look at. Do you need to change the population you're working with? Do you need to take a long vacation because you haven't in a long time? When was the last time you took a full 2 weeks? Think about what you might need to do to mitigate the compassion fatigue. And if you're having secondary traumatic stress, it might be worth 2 or 3 sessions with somebody to talk about what set you off and activated you to have those symptoms. That may be really worthwhile. What we know is that we can usually adjust and decrease symptoms in about 2 to 4 sessions. We offer people about 10 sessions, but the rest is just practice. We gave 10 sessions to folks who are not psychologically minded, not economically used to paying for therapy in Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina. We did a large study. And what we found was that people's symptoms decreased by 2 standard deviations after the first 2 sessions. And the first 2 sessions were just informational sessions. They were psycho-ed about what to expect, what was good coping, what wasn't. And then the rest, 2 or 3 sessions is the cognitive restructuring, and the rest is practice. So we know that with practice, you can really control your emotions and the effect that this stress has on you. So I know it's a lot of information to throw at you. I wanted to leave some time for questions, and I have not looked at the chat box. So I'm going to try and open that up and open it up to questions. You there, Dana?
I am here.
Yeah, I haven't asked another question since the one about what was the most common
I don't see any questions
experience.
at the moment.
Okay, are you guys good? Do you want to do the scoring on the pro qual then, or are there questions that you'd like to put in the chat or unmute yourself and ask? Right, shall we go to the pro qual? Were you able to complete it?
We just had one question come through on
Oh,
the chat.
good. Okay,
It
great.
says, what is the research on lower patient ratios?
So there are two different types of research around patient ratios, and it has to do with, first is the type of patient that you're caring for. Now, what we used to do is rotate so that people could have different types of patients so that you didn't always have all the most serious trauma patients. So we know that people with the highest number of trauma patients, whether it's stab wounds or life-threatening illness or other violent kind of incident that has been perpetrated on them, we know that those are the staff who have the highest forms of compassion fatigue. Not so much burnout, although it could lead to that if you're constantly the ones who have the highest level of the most severe patients, especially patients who are in their dying stage. Numbers have a lot to do with how much you're able to engage with them. So yes, less burnout is definitely can be a part of a lower ratio patient, but it is not so much about the numbers as it is about the type of patient that you're caring for. This is especially true when you have patients who die, who may be coming into the emergency room. Maybe they're at their end stage of life to begin with, and you're not able to get them up to a room and get them comfortable. I mean, there are all kinds of circumstances. So we certainly do recommend, manageable number of patients. Can you engage with your patients enough to feel like you are effective and that you have an exchange that's positive, whether you're telling them you're going to feel better, it's all right, we're going to take care of you. Even simple things like that can make the patient feel better. And we know that, so it makes us feel better. So it is more about the type of patient. Do you have patients who are severely, severely ill? Do you have patients who are in violent situations that you're always attending to, especially if there's exposure to gore and violence? Bodies in water are the most difficult. So if you're responding to something that happened where there was people who died in a flood, or you get a car that goes into a river and you pull it out and you've got 3 or 4 bodies that have been in water. These are things that are the most disturbing according to the research. But after that, it is those that are very, very high trauma patients. So violence, incidents of human caused intent to harm. So those are very highly impactful. So your gang issues, somebody who's been hit by a car purposefully or hit and run, right? They took off, gunshot wounds, stab wounds, things like that are, and women who are abused physically in domestic violence situations. Those are our highest scoring for, and that really does turn out to be burnout because again, it's the type of patient. So we're very concerned about people who are constantly doing that kind of work. They need good supervision. They need debriefings. We used to, give people an opportunity to debrief at the beginning of shifts, at the end of shifts. We tend not to do that anymore. That can be really helpful. But again, of course, I don't know what a manageable number of patients is for you too. If you can't manage the number of patients, which is what we see in our childcare system, then we see a lot of burnout. That's an organizational issue, not enough staff to cover. We've certainly seen that in nursing as they bring in the travel nurses who get paid more, and then suddenly their contracts end and they're getting paid the same as everybody else, and they take off, and now you've got these staff shortages again. It's really a circular issue in the nursing industry. What's your experience? Are you seeing that you can't manage the numbers, or is it the type of patient that make it more difficult for you? Or for those of you who are managers, managing the staff, right, takes up 90% of your time. They're distressed. You can't get enough staff. So you know you're working the ones that you have like crazy. You feel badly for them, but this is what you need to do because you have patients. And this is, the country at this point. It's not an individual issue.
The answer was number of patients.
Number of patients. Okay. So that's really interesting. You must have a very high caseload. Yeah, because that's not usually what we see in the literature, unless it is, again, that you can't engage with them, that the numbers are so high that you really can't engage with them. There's nothing worse to a helper than not being able to take care of your patients, right? That's what you're there for. I'm sorry that you're experiencing that. We've been talking to the American Healthcare Association, to the executive managers about trying to address the fact that we need to be able to bring in staff and for them to figure out how to do this. We're using all kinds of workforce management tools and recommendations to try and bring in additional staff. This is an issue throughout the country, especially after COVID. Other questions?
There aren't any in the chat at the time. If you want to discuss your document, April, if any other questions pop up, I can certainly.
Yeah, if you can jump in, that would be great. So if you haven't done the professional quality of life, again, there are really very few research-based tools for helpers specifically, and this is one of them. The ProQual, and if I go to the last slide, I do have it on the bottom of the resource. It's free, it's downloadable. Dr. Stam just asks that you do not change it, and certainly give the credit because she runs this. This has been a 20-year research project where people go on the website and actually fill in their results. So she continues to update the research on this all the time, and it is specifically for helpers. There are 3 subscales. So you answer the questions from 1 to 30. And they have to do with your work as a helper and your perception about, how you feel about your work as a helper. It's a Likert scale from 1 to 5, easy enough, self-explanatory. 1 equals never, 2 is rarely, 3 sometimes, 4 often, and 5 very often. As I mentioned, the most important thing about this is to be honest. Think about each question and answer honestly. You want to be able to make this worthwhile if you're going to actually go through the process. So within these questions, there are 3 subscales. 1 is compassion satisfaction. Now, compassion satisfaction, as we said, is the pleasure, the meaning, the purpose that you get from doing your work. Many of us feel very positively about being able to help others. Maybe you really like your colleagues, your ability to contribute to the work setting and to greater society, right? A higher score on compassion satisfaction rarely represents a greater ability to effectively do your job as a caregiver. The average score is around 50. About 25% of the people score higher, and about 25% score lower. So if you're in the higher range, you're probably doing some good things to help yourself professionally. If your scores are below 50 or 40, especially, you may find that you're either having problems with the job, with the clients, maybe you're not getting the satisfaction that you used to get, or as you're saying here, maybe the things have changed. You have so many more patients than you used to have, and it's harder to engage with them. Maybe you have a different population that you were assigned to that you're not thrilled that you're working with. Secondary traumatic stress, as we said, it's comparable to compassion fatigue. We actually use them almost interchangeably. It's about your work related to the exposure or the traumatic events of your patients developing problems because of somebody else's trauma and you're caring for them. It is somewhat rare, but it does happen to some people. I think that, again, because of COVID, we saw that 73% of you indicated compassion fatigue in the beginning. It's a very, very high number. I do relate that more to COVID and to the situation that we've had in the healthcare settings where we have been understaffed, uh, where the regulations have changed dramatically, where the reimbursement has changed, the paperwork has increased. So I think there's a number of things that contribute to that, in addition to COVID and having patients who were very, very sick, many who died, many who would not comply with protecting you, protecting themselves. That's really frustrating. Not caring about the health, protecting the healthcare workers either. So it's not unusual that we see high numbers. We saw high numbers of burnout during COVID, and we continue to in some areas. You may also repeatedly hear stories about traumatic events that happened to other people. Maybe it happened in your family, maybe one of your friends. Anyway, if you're exposed to others' traumatic events as a result of your work, these are symptoms that can usually come on pretty quickly. It may cause you to be afraid, as we talked about, having sleep problems. The score on this scale, the average score, is also about 50. We see about 25% of people score below 43, and about 25% score above 57. So if your score is above 57, you may want to take some time to think about what it is at work that may be frightening you, making you anxious, or if there's some other reason for your elevated score. Sometimes if we've had a recent death in our own family, we suffer more from hearing other people's problems. Higher scores don't mean that you have a problem, but they're an indication that you might want to look at this and think about what you can do in the workplace or your work environment, or discuss this with your colleague, your supervisor, your physician. And then burnout, as we said before, is more about the workplace. Do you get along with your supervisor, your manager? Do you get what you need from them? Do you like the people you work with? This is a big issue, right? It's one of the elements that really leaves people feeling hopeless, often why they leave the profession, and difficulties in dealing with the work or doing their job effectively. Problem is, it interrupts your thought process, your decision making. It can really make it difficult for you to work properly. Higher scores mean that you're at higher risk for burnout. The average score is about 50. About 25% of people score above 57, and about 25% score below 43. So if your score is below 43, this probably means that you're doing a good job, and you're feeling good about your work, you feel effective, you feel competent. But if it's above that 57, you might want to look at what you're doing. What do you need? Were you just having a bad day when you did this, or are you having trouble with your supervisor? Are you having trouble with the patients that you're taking care of and you need things to change? Thank you for your comments. So if you haven't done the scoring, I'm just going to go through it simply, and you can take a look at it. The instructions did come, but it's a little bit complicated. So I just want to walk you through the reverse scoring. Because it's a research document, there are 5 different questions that you need to reverse the score. So that means that you're going to change the number. Okay, so for question number 1, if you wrote a 1, you want to cross that out and make it a 5. If you wrote a 2, cross that out and make it a 4. If you wrote a 3, that remains the same. If you wrote a 4, cross that out and write 2. And if you wrote a 5, cross that out and write 1 instead. So you're going to do that for question 1. Question number 4, same thing. For question number 1, question number 4. If you wrote a 1, cross it out, change it to 5. If you wrote a 2, cross that out and change it to 4. 3 remains the same. If you wrote a 4, cross that out and make it a 2. And if you wrote a 5, cross that out and make it a 1. Same thing for question 15 and question 17 and question 29. So you're going to change the score on number 1, number 4, number 15, number 17, and number 29. The new score is what you're going to add up. So your first subscale is compassion fatigue. There's no changed scores on that one. Just add up your answers to questions 3, 6, 12, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 27, and 30. There's a scoring sheet for you. You add up the sum that you put next to those questions. On the burnout scale, that's where the reversed score is. So don't use your original answers. Use the new number in those 5 questions. So add up the numbers around question 1, 4, 8, 10, 15, 17, 19, 21, 26, and 29. You're using the new score that you just changed. That's your burnout scale. And the last one is secondary traumatic stress or compassion fatigue. They're interchangeable on this scale. Add up what you put next to questions number 2, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, 14, 23, 25, and 28. And that's your secondary traumatic stress scale. What I have found in using this tool over the past 15 years is that most people are generally doing better than they think they are, which is why I recommend you use it, because I think that's really helpful. Reinforces that you are doing some things that work and that you should keep doing them. Add some pieces to it to boost yourself as well. Think about adding some of the cognitive exercises. But if you're finding that you're close to burnout, you want to think about it. What do I need to do? I don't want to leave my profession. Maybe I need to talk to my supervisor. Is there something else I need? Maybe I need to sit with my peers once a week and really get a chance to, talk with other people who are dealing with the same issues I'm dealing with. You want to avoid burnout. Again, we lose too many people when burnout continues. We know this is a tough field. It's going to continue to be a tough field. How can we do things that make ourselves feel better? We can't always control society or COVID or what the CEOs and the executives decide to do around staffing and funding. We can certainly advocate, but you want to be able to control what you want to do with your life. So what do you need to do? You're somebody who needs to get up and walk out and take a 10-minute walk outside, be in nature every day. That's what you need to do. When I went to work in Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina, there were 12 different offices across the state where the foster care workers were. Talk about dedication, boy. Every one of them was sitting at their desk. When I asked them what their biggest problem was, every office staff, every single one in 12 different offices across the entire state told me that they don't stop to go to the bathroom. Right? Is that unbelievable? I think it's probably familiar to you nurses, right? They don't even stop to go to the bathroom. We started to institute that the supervisors would not roll their eyes when they got up to walk out the door together to take a walk for 10 or 15 minutes on their lunch break. They were all sitting at their desk, taking their lunch every day, not going to the bathroom to the last minute. We told the supervisor, no looking at the clock when everybody walks out, that they would go out together and start and just do 10 minutes. And they were fighting this. They were fighting this. No, we can't leave our desk. Yes, you have to. They were really getting to the point of burnout. 10 minutes every day they had to start. That was their assignment, to start to walk as a group. And the supervisors were not allowed to roll their eyes or look at the clocks when they saw them walking out. What do you need to do? Is it a 10-minute walk? Is it a break chatting with someone? Is it picking up the phone? Think about it so you don't get to burnout. And if you're doing okay on the compassion satisfaction scale, remember to keep doing things that help you. Don't give up on things that make you feel good. Make sure that you're introducing joy into your life on a regular basis. What makes you smile? What makes you happy? What makes you laugh? This has the potential, I'm reading your response, Judy, for research on the effectiveness of shared governance structures. Yes, allowing nurses to take time for self-care. We know from the research that it makes us function better, it makes us better at decision making, it makes us better at judgment. Everything increases when we take that 10 minutes, that 15 minutes. Understanding the why and the reacting to situations, yeah, and the impact on the number of patients in an assignment, it's a big deal. There's not enough focus on it, and the research is very, very clear. And again, we're not talking about like years of therapy or even, formal therapy. Breathing, stretching, walking, right? We're doing yoga sessions, chair yoga for the staff who answer suicide calls because they won't get up and walk away from their desk. They've got to take calls. So we're introducing how do you do stretching, right? Stretching moves stress out of your body. Stretching, breathing exercises, and walking. These are the no harm things. If you do those three things some point every, you're going to be in better shape. And then social support, social support. Can you talk to? Who can you send a note to? I was traveling every week for years, and I felt really distanced from my family, who I'm very close to, was missing, my aunt's birthday party and this or that. And I just started writing cards from everywhere I went. I would just write a postcard. Hi, I miss you. I love you. Thinking about you. And they all commented about how we all felt more connected. What do you need to do to help yourself feel connected and have more social support? Simple things, okay? I don't want you guys to burden yourself with having to do a ton of things. Just think about some simple things you can do to bring more joy into your life and to feel better. We need you. You're some of the most important people we have in our society today. We don't want to lose you, and we want you to be well. That's the most important thing, to be well as you continue to do your good work.